The desert town of Dry Creek lay shrouded in dust and golden haze as the sun dipped below the jagged line of the western horizon. Wagons creaked past wooden storefronts, hooves struck sparks against the hard-packed road, and laughter spilled from swinging saloon doors into the night air. For most of the men who filled the bar, the saloon was a refuge, a place where whiskey drowned regrets and music dulled the weight of days spent under the punishing sun. But on this night, and every night like it, there was another reason they gathered. The reason was a woman. Her name, at least the one they knew her by, was Rose. The piano struck a jaunty tune, fiddles joined, and a hush fell across the smoky room as she stepped into the lamplight. Rose carried herself with a confidence that silenced even the most hardened of cowhands. Her dress clung close to her curves, crimson as spilled wine, shimmering faintly where lamplight caught the satin. Every movement, from the sway of her hips to the arch of her shoulders, carried an allure that was equal parts deliberate performance and something deeper, something that couldn't quite be imitated. She wasn't the most beautiful woman these men had ever seen, at least not in the way a portrait or polished society lady might appear, but she was alive in a way that commanded the eye. Her hair, a cascade of dark chestnut curls, framed a face lit by an enigmatic smile. Her lips, painted the same shade as her dress, curved not only for the audience, but for some unseen secret, as if she sang for someone they could not see. And her eyes, bright and knowing, shifted like flames, sometimes playful, sometimes weary, always distant, as though looking at something far beyond the smoky rafters of the saloon. Rose's voice filled the air, low and smoky, riding the fiddle and piano with a power that surprised newcomers. It wasn't the polished voice of a trained singer, but something rawer, touched with sorrow. Each note lingered, trembling in the haze of cigar smoke and candlelight. The cowboys leaned in, drinks forgotten, their hardened hands wrapped tight around glasses that no longer rose to their lips. She had them all, every single one, wrapped in her voice, in the soft curve of her body silhouetted by lamplight. Men dreamed about Rose, they argued over her, they fought for her, yet none of them truly knew her, because Rose was only a name. A mask she had chosen the day she stepped into this town, desperate and alone, needing something to cover the past she had left behind. Beneath the satin, beneath the rouge and the practiced smile, there was another name, one she never spoke aloud. That name was tender, born from another life, a life of innocence and quiet dreams, now buried under dust and smoke. But the men didn't know that. To them, Rose was a vision, untouchable and eternal. To the owner of the saloon, she was profit, the jewel that kept the whiskey flowing and the tables full. To the women who scrubbed floors and poured drinks, she was both idol and rival, someone they admired but could never quite become. The only one who truly understood Rose was Rose herself. As she sang, her gaze roamed across the crowded room, rough hands, scarred faces, sweat-slick hats tossed aside on tables. She saw longing in their eyes, hunger even, but none of it touched her. She had grown used to the way men looked at her, had trained herself to turn it into currency, to wield it like a weapon that ensured her survival. She didn't blush anymore. She didn't shy away. She learned to give them enough to dream, but never enough to reach. And yet, as the notes rolled off her lips, she felt that hollow ache again, the distance between who she seemed to be and who she once was. She remembered quiet fields, a sky without smoke, laughter that wasn't bought with coin or applause. She remembered a girl's name whispered with love, a name that felt soft and whole, nothing like the sharp thorn of Rose. When the song ended, the room erupted in cheers. Coins clattered against the stage, glasses raised, voices shouting her borrowed name. Rose dipped her head, curtsied with that same mysterious smile, and for a moment she let them believe the illusion that she was theirs to adore, theirs to claim with coin and drink. But when she turned away, walking back into the shadowed corridor behind the stage, her smile fell. Alone, away from the clamor, she pressed her palm to her chest, feeling the steady beat beneath the corset's squeeze. Her reflection in the cracked mirror showed the famous star of the saloon, lips red, cheeks flushed, hair tumbling wild in curls. But her eyes gave her away. Those eyes belonged to another woman entirely. A woman whose real name was hidden, buried in dust and memory, spoken only in silence. Rose leaned against the wall, letting the faint hum of the crowd fade behind her. She inhaled the faint scent of whiskey, candle wax, and smoke that clung to her skin, and for the briefest moment she let herself remember, her father's hand guiding her through tall grass, the laughter of a summer long gone, the sound of her name carried by the wind across fields she might never see again. The applause outside rose again as the piano struck another song, but she didn't return right away. Instead, she whispered to herself, barely audible, the name that once belonged to her. It tasted foreign now, heavy on her tongue, a relic of a girl who had long since vanished. But she whispered it anyway, because sometimes it was the only thing that reminded her she was real. Then, with a steadying breath, she straightened, fixed her smile back in place, and returned to the stage. The mask was hers to wear, and she would wear it until she could no longer. For tonight, and for every night the saloon demanded her, she was Rose, the woman they all adore, but none of them knew. And somewhere in her heart, though she didn't realize it yet, the past she had buried so carefully was stirring again, waiting for the moment when someone would speak that true name.
The saloon was a haze of smoke that night, thicker than usual. Lamps burned low, and the crowd was rowdier, fueled by whiskey and long hours under a merciless sun. Coins rattled on tables, cards slapped down, and somewhere in the corner, two men argued, loud enough to draw a cheer when fists were thrown. Over it all, the piano kept pounding, a relentless heartbeat driving the night forward. And then Rose appeared. The room hushed as it always did, eyes drawn toward the crimson figure gliding across the stage. Her song began low, trembling, then rose above the drunken clamor, weaving through smoke and shadows with a sound that seemed to belong to another world. To them she was light. To herself she was little more than a flicker in the dark. But that night, among the rough faces and hungry stares, another gaze held hers. He sat apart, in the farthest corner where the lamp barely reached, a silhouette carved from shadow. Unlike the others, he did not lean forward with a greedy smile, nor did he clap his hands on the table. He didn't even touch the whiskey that sat before him, glass full and untouched. He simply watched. Rose felt it. She always felt eyes on her, but this was different. His gaze didn't strip her down, didn't devour her as the others did. It searched, as though it already knew her, as though it had been waiting. Her voice faltered for a breath before she steadied it again. The men cheered louder, thinking it was part of her act, never knowing the tremor that rippled through her chest. The song ended. Applause thundered, coins scattered at her feet. Rose curtsied, her lips forming the same painted smile. But her eyes flicked once more to the corner, toward the shadowed stranger. He hadn't moved. Hours passed. Men came and went, the tables emptied and filled again, the smoke grew heavier. Rose sang 2 more songs, laughter spilling from her lips in rehearsed lines she had perfected years ago. Yet no matter how she tried to ignore him, her eyes betrayed her, darting again and again toward that silent figure. And then it happened. As she stepped off the stage, slipping into the dim corridor behind the saloon's velvet curtain, a voice followed her. Low, steady, quiet enough that no one else seemed to hear. Lila. The name struck her like a bullet. Her knees almost buckled beneath her, the tray of coins she carried trembling in her grasp. She hadn't heard that name in years, not since she buried it beneath satin and paint and smoke. The world called her Rose. Only one name survived in this town, and it was not hers. But this man, this stranger, had said it. Heart pounding, she turned, peering through the haze. He was closer now, standing at the edge of the stage where the lamplight barely touched him. His face came into view at last, sharper than the rumors painted him, with lines carved deep by sun and time. His hair was dark, his jaw shadowed with days of travel. His coat hung heavy, worn at the seams, a revolver slung low on his hip. He looked every bit the outlaw they whispered about. But it wasn't the gun that froze her. It was his eyes. They weren't hungry or wild. They were tired, sad, and certain. "Lila," he repeated, softer this time, almost reverent. She shook her head, panic swelling at her chest. "You're mistaken. That's not—" But the words died on her lips, because she knew him. She knew that face, though time had hardened it, though distance had carved it into something rougher. Memories clawed at her, sharp and unrelenting. A summer long ago, a boy who wasn't yet a man, promises whispered in secret places. Ethan. The name slipped from her lips before she could stop it. For years she had convinced herself he was gone, swallowed by the frontier, nothing more than a ghost of her youth. But here he stood, in the heart of the saloon, alive, and carrying the weight of stories written in blood and exile. Her chest heaved, breath coming too quick. How do you remember?" The corners of his mouth twitched, but it wasn't quite a smile. "How could I forget?" Rose staggered back into the corridor, pressing her hand to the wall as if the boards might steady her. She was Rose now, the saloon's jewel, untouchable, untamed. But at the sound of her true name, she felt stripped bare. The mask slipped, and suddenly she was the girl she used to be, trembling under the weight of a truth she thought she had buried forever. "Don't," she whispered harshly, though her voice shook. "Don't call me that, not here." But Ethan didn't retreat. His steps were slow, deliberate, as though he understood that one wrong move would send her running. "Then tell me what name I should call you, because I only ever knew the one that mattered." Her throat tightened. Behind them, the piano struck up another song, laughter roared, and the world spun as it always did. But between them, time stopped. Rose, Lila, turned her face away. "You shouldn't have come." "I didn't come for them," Ethan replied, voice low, steady. "I came for you." The words cracked something inside her. She wanted to laugh, to shove him away, to tell him he was years too late. But her hands trembled, her heart raced, and all she could do was whisper, "You don't know who I am anymore." Ethan's eyes softened, though the weight of his scars showed in every line of his face. "Maybe you've forgotten, but I never have." And for the first time in years, beneath the mask of Rose, the star of the saloon, she felt like someone remembered her. Not the woman she pretended to be, but the girl she had once been. The room erupted with cheers as another fight broke out at the tables. No one noticed the outlaw and the saloon star standing in the shadows, staring at each other across the chasm of years. But she noticed, and her heart, buried for so long, beat louder than the piano, louder than the shouts. Because Ethan had spoken her name, and suddenly the past she thought she had erased was alive again.
The saloon had long since quieted, though muffled laughter and the faint twang of a fiddle still drifted from the main hall. Behind the red velvet curtain, Rose slipped through the narrow corridor, her heels clicking against the warped floorboards. She paused at the door to her dressing room, fingers trembling on the brass knob. She wasn't sure if she was afraid, or if she had been waiting for this moment all along. The little room smelled of old perfume and spilled whiskey, the air thick with dust. A single oil lamp flickered on the vanity table, throwing shadows that danced across the cracked mirror. She closed the door softly behind her, heart pounding. And there he was, Ethan, leaning against the wall as if he belonged to the darkness itself. His hat brim cast his eyes in shadow, but she could feel his gaze like a hand against her skin. For a long moment neither spoke. The lamp sputtered, and her breath came shallow, uneven. She clutched the folds of her crimson dress, her painted lips parting. At last she managed, barely above a whisper, "How do you know that name?" He tilted his head, his jaw tightening as though he were holding back years of words. Then, slowly, he stepped into the weak light. His face was rougher than she remembered, lined with scars that told of gunfights and roads traveled far from mercy. Yet his eyes hadn't changed. "I know it," he said hoarsely, "because I never forgot it. No matter how many miles I rode, no matter how many nights I tried to drink it away." Her throat constricted. The sound of his voice brought back the ghosts of wheat fields and starlit nights, of a boy with calloused hands who used to dream alongside her. Rose swallowed hard, but tears stung her eyes before she could stop them. She had buried that girl, buried her so deep she thought no one could ever find her. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, shaking her head. "This town, it's no place for you. If the sheriff sees you—" Ethan's mouth curved into a humorless smile. "The sheriff already wants my head. What's one more risk when I've lived with nothing but regrets?" He stepped closer, boots echoing in the small space. "Tell me, Rose, or should I say—" He spoke her true name then, low and tender, and it broke something inside her. Her knees weakened. She turned away, clutching the vanity to steady herself. "Don't say it, please. That name belongs to someone who died a long time ago." Ethan stopped just behind her. She could feel the heat of him, the steady presence she thought she had lost forever. His reflection loomed in the mirror, shadowed but undeniably him. "No," he murmured. "She didn't die. She just hid herself. And I came back because I couldn't let her vanish." The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. Rose's fingers brushed the old locket lying half-hidden among her powders and rouge. She snapped it shut quickly, as if he might see the photograph inside, the last relic of a life that had ended the night they were torn apart. She turned to face him, her eyes blazing with a mixture of fear and longing. "Why now, Ethan? After all these years, after everything, why crawl out of the shadows now when I've built something that keeps me alive?" His expression softened with sorrow. "Because I had to see if you were still you, if you still remembered." His voice dropped lower. "Do you?" Her lips trembled. The truth clawed at her, but she bit it back. Still, her silence was an answer, and they both knew it. Ethan stepped closer until there was barely a breath between them.
The lamplight carved lines across his scarred face, across the raw honesty in his eyes. "Do you remember that night? The night we said we'd ride away together?" Her breath hitched. Memories poured in. The old barn, the smell of hay and horses, the trembling of her hands as she clung to him, the whispered promises beneath a sky heavy with stars. She remembered the gunshots that shattered it all, the men who dragged him away, the cold dawn where she was left alone, believing he'd never come back. "Yes, I remember. I remember everything I tried to forget." Tears spilled down her cheeks, cutting through the powder on her face. She hated herself for crying, for letting him see the fragile girl she had locked away. But Ethan's hand rose, hesitated, then brushed the tear from her cheek. The roughness of his fingers was achingly familiar. "I came back for you," he whispered. "Not for the saloon girl, not for the star they all cheer for you, because you never left me." Her chest ached with longing, but fear gnawed at her stronger. "It's too late," she said, forcing the words out, though they tasted like ash. "I can't go back. I can't be her again. And you're an outlaw. They'd hang you at dawn if they could." Ethan's eyes darkened, but he didn't flinch. "Then let them try. I've been running my whole life, but I won't run from you." Rose shook her head, stepping back, the oil lamp flickering wildly as though the air itself trembled with their unspoken truths. "You don't understand. If they find out who I really am, if they find out where I came from, everything I've built will crumble, and I can't—" Her voice faltered. "I can't lose it all again." Ethan's gaze softened with sorrow. "I understand more than you think, but hiding doesn't change the past. It only chains you to it." The words struck her deep. For a moment she stood caught between two lives, the glittering mask of Rose, the untouchable star of the saloon, and the fragile, desperate girl whose name Ethan had spoken like a prayer. She wanted to scream, to push him away, to cling to him all at once. Instead, she collapsed into the chair by the vanity, burying her face in her hands. "Why did you come back?" she sobbed. "Why now, when I was finally starting to breathe again?" Ethan kneeled before her, his voice rough, raw like gravel under boots. "Because you never left me. Because every mile I rode, every wrong I did, I carried you, and I couldn't bear it any more. I had to find you, even if it killed me." The lamp hissed as the oil burned low. Outside, a burst of drunken laughter reminded them both of the world waiting to tear them apart. But in that cramped, dim room, time seemed to hold its breath. Rose lifted her face, streaked with tears, her painted mask ruined. She looked at him not as the outlaw the town whispered about, not as the stranger in the shadows, but as the boy she had once loved. And in that gaze lay both salvation and ruin. She whispered the question that had haunted her since he appeared. "What happens now?" His answer was simple, but it carried the weight of a vow. "Now," he said, "we remember who we were, and we decide if we still have the courage to be them." The lamp sputtered, casting them into deeper shadow. The choice hung heavy between them, unspoken but undeniable. For the first time in years, Rose felt her past pressing against her chest, demanding to be claimed or buried forever. And as Ethan's hand lingered near hers, she knew the night had only just begun.
Rumors spread faster than wildfire across dry prairie grass.
By the time the next night fell, every card table in town whispered the same name. Every bottle passed across the bar carried the same hushed warning. Ethan was back. Some spoke it with fear, others with hunger, for his head carried a price richer than most men would see in their lives. And when men grow desperate enough, blood becomes cheaper than whiskey. The saloon was alive that night, louder than ever, as if the walls themselves felt the coming storm. Rose stood on the stage, wrapped once more in her blazing scarlet dress, her lips parting to sing. But her voice faltered. The crowd's eyes weren't on her. They flicked restlessly to the doors, to the corners, to the shadows where guns might rise at any moment. Then the bat-wing doors creaked open. Ethan stepped through. He didn't hide this time, didn't lurk in darkness. He walked straight into the heart of the storm, the brim of his hat low, his long coat brushing the dust from the threshold. The piano stumbled to silence. Every man in the room stiffened, hands brushing holsters, eyes narrowing. The sheriff wasn't there. He didn't need to be. The men inside didn't care about justice, only the gold promised for Ethan's capture, dead or alive. And some eyes had already turned on Rose, sharp with suspicion. She had been seen speaking to him, too close, too familiar. And in a town like this, loyalty to an outlaw was a sin punished as harshly as the crimes themselves. Rose's heart thundered in her chest. She clutched the microphone of her song, a simple brass stand, like a lifeline. Her voice faltered. But when Ethan's gaze found hers across the smoke and shifting bodies, she felt steadier. She saw no fear in his eyes, only resolve. The first chair scraped across the floor. A burly ranch hand rose, his revolver glinting. "That's him! The bastard's worth more than gold to any man with a steady aim!" Others followed. Soon half the room was on its feet, the air thick with menace, fingers twitching on gun belts. And then someone shouted, "She's with him! The saloon star! She's hiding him under that pretty smile!" Rose froze as the eyes of the mob swung her way. Their stares cut through her sequins, their suspicion unraveling her painted mask. Her throat dried as fear clawed at her. But when she looked at Ethan, who now stood with his back straight, hand loose but ready on his pistol, something inside her broke free. A gunshot cracked, wood splintered near Ethan's boots, the saloon erupted. Bottles shattered, tables overturned, men ducked and cursed as smoke from black powder filled the air. Ethan's revolver was out in a heartbeat, barking thunder into the chaos. One bounty hunter fell, another staggered back with a howl. The crowd surged, driven by greed and rage, pistols flashing in the haze. And Rose didn't think, she moved. The red silk of her dress rippled as she leapt down from the stage, weaving through the madness. Glass crunched under her heels, and hands reached for her arm, but she tore herself free. She saw Ethan, standing near the bar, firing into the smoke, his teeth bared against the storm. And then, without knowing why, she threw herself in front of him. The room stilled in that instant, as if even violence held its breath. A dozen barrels were trained on them both, and yet Rose stood tall, her hair falling wild around her flushed face, her chest rising with ragged breaths. "Stop this madness!" she screamed, her voice breaking through the smoke like lightning through storm clouds. "Stop this madness!" Her hands spread, trembling but unyielding, shielding Ethan with her body. "You call him a criminal, a thief, a shadow you've hunted through whispers. Maybe he is. Maybe he's done wrong. But to me," her voice cracked, raw, but she didn't falter. "To me, he is not just an outlaw. He is my past. He is the truth you'll never understand." The crowd wavered. Some sneered. Some shifted uneasily,
their knuckles white on their weapons. A sharp voice cut through the din. "Get out of the way, girl! He ain't worth your life!" Rose lifted her chin. "Then neither am I," she said, her tone steady, proud. For the first time in years, she spoke not as Rose, the starlet in crimson silk, but as the girl whose real name had been buried under masks and songs. That name lived on her tongue now, burning, unafraid. And as she spoke it aloud, as the sound echoed in the smoke-choked saloon, she felt reborn. A shot rang out. Pain bloomed. Rose gasped as blood stained the folds of her red dress, darkening the silk like ink bleeding into paper. She staggered, but Ethan's arms caught her before she fell. "God, no!" he rasped, his hand pressing against the wound, his eyes wild with fury and fear. He turned on the mob, his pistol raised, his voice a roar that shook the rafters. "If one more man dares, I'll send him straight to hell!" The mob faltered. Smoke cleared enough to show Rose's pale face against Ethan's chest, her blood pooling across the wood floor. Men glanced at one another, the hunger in their eyes dimmed by the sight of her sacrifice. For all their greed, not one had expected the saloon star to bleed for an outlaw. "Get out," he growled, his gun unwavering, "or I'll make corpses of you all." One by one, the men backed down. The reward wasn't worth this, not worth the ghostly defiance in Rose's gaze as she clung to life, not worth the fire burning in Ethan's eyes. The room emptied, boots thudding across floorboards, mutters fading into the night. The piano player, pale and trembling, slipped out last, leaving behind only overturned tables, shattered glass, and the sharp scent of gunpowder and blood. Silence followed. Only Rose's ragged breaths broke it. Ethan lowered her gently to the floor, cradling her as if she were spun from glass. "Why?" he whispered, voice cracking, forehead pressed to hers. "Why would you do this for me?" Her eyes fluttered open. The mask was gone. No painted smile, no stage voice, only the girl he had once known. "Because," she breathed, "for the first time, I wanted to live as myself, even if it cost me everything." Tears blurred Ethan's eyes, but he forced a smile, fierce and aching. "You're not going to lose everything, not while I'm here." The oil lamps guttered low, their glow dim against the shadows creeping in. Rose's blood stained his hands, her crimson dress blending with the spreading pool on the floorboards. Yet in that fragile moment, through pain, through ruin, there was something undeniable. She had finally stepped out from behind the mask, and Ethan, outlaw and lover both, knew that from this night onward, nothing in this town, no sheriff, no bounty hunter, no crowd of drunken gunslingers could ever erase her truth again. Dawn broke over the prairie like a whisper. The first light of morning stretched thin fingers of gold through the shattered windows of the saloon, brushing against overturned chairs, broken bottles, and the dark stains of blood still drying on the floorboards. The echoes of gunfire had long since died, but the silence left in its place was heavier than any storm. Ethan leaned against the bar, breath shallow, a crimson bloom spreading across the side of his coat where a bullet had torn through him. His face was pale beneath the brim of his hat, lips pressed tight against the pane, but his eyes, those unyielding eyes, remained locked on her. Rose, still trembling from her own wound, knelt beside him, her scarlet dress darkened with blood and dust. "You need to move," she whispered, her hands pressing against his wound, her voice breaking with fear. "If you stay here, they'll come back. They always come back." Ethan tried to laugh, but it came out as a ragged cough. "You think I can walk out of here, with half the town ready to put a bullet in my back?" Rose met his gaze, and for a moment the mask of the saloon star flickered across her face, calm, composed, untouchable. But then it shattered, leaving only the girl beneath, the one who had once run barefoot across wheat fields, who had once believed love was strong enough to carry her away from ruin. She shook her head, tears cutting through the soot and powder on her cheeks. "You don't get to give up, Ethan. Not after finding me again. Not after tonight." He looked at her long, searching, as if memorizing every line of her face. Then with a grunt, he shifted, forcing himself upright. Pain carved lines deep into his brow, but he didn't complain. He never had. Rose slipped under his arm, steadying him with all the strength her fragile frame could muster. Together they stumbled toward the bat-wing doors, toward the fading stars and the pale horizon beyond. The town was empty. The mob that had once bayed for his blood had scattered like frightened cattle, leaving only silence and the echo of their violence. As they stepped into the cool morning air, Rose felt the weight of the night lift from her shoulders. For the first time in years, she wasn't walking back into the saloon's golden lights or the roar of an audience. She was walking away. They moved slowly through the dusty streets, Ethan leaning heavier with each step, but never falling. Rose's bare feet slipped on the cold boards of the boardwalk, her red dress trailing dirt and ash behind her like the final act of a play. The town shrank behind them, its saloon and its shadows fading into memory. By the time they reached the edge of the prairie, the sky had opened fully, painting the land in a wash of pink and amber. She stopped, breathless, turning her face to the wind that carried the scent of grass and distant rivers. Ethan sagged against her, his hand clutching hers tight, and in that silence broken only by the rustle of morning, something in her gave way. She let the dress slip from her shoulders. It fell into the grass like a curtain dropping after the final scene, red silk pooling in the dirt, stained with blood, smoke, and 100 nights of false smiles. She stood in the dawn's cool air, stripped of sequins and pretense, her simple shift fluttering in the breeze. For the first time in years, she wasn't Rose, the saloon star. She was herself. She turned to Ethan, eyes wet, lips trembling. She whispered, "Call me. Not Rose. The name you knew before? The only one that ever belonged to me?" Ethan's hand lifted, shaking, his thumb brushing her cheek. His voice was hoarse, cracked with pain and memory, but when he spoke, it was steady. He said her true name, the name hidden beneath painted lips and stage lights, the name buried under years of survival. The sound of it broke her. Her knees weakened, and she fell against him, sobbing into his chest. "I thought I'd lost it. I thought that girl was gone." He shook his head, pressing his lips to her hair. She never was gone. She just needed someone to remember. The words were a vow, not spoken like promises made under chandeliers, but carved from the marrow of his soul. He had carried her name through dust, blood, and years of exile, guarding it like a flame against the winds of the world. And now, as the prairie stretched infinite before them, he gave it back to her. They walked further, past the last fence posts and into the wild fields, each step pulling them farther from the town, from the bounty hunters, from the masks that they had both worn. Ethan staggered more heavily with each stride, his wound bleeding through the cloth, but when Rose tried to slow, he shook his head, murmuring, "Keep walking. If I stop, I may never start again." So she held him tighter, her shoulder aching from her own wound, her bare feet stinging on sharp stones, and together they pushed on. The prairie swallowed them whole. The saloon star and the outlaw faded into two figures silhouetted against the rising sun, broken, battered, but still moving, still alive. At last, when the first true warmth of day touched their faces, Ethan faltered. His knees buckled, and he sank to the grass. Rose fell with him, cradling him against her lap, her hands pressing desperately against his bleeding side. "Stay with me," she pleaded. "Please, Ethan, stay." His breath came shallow, his lashes heavy against his cheek, but his lips curved into the faintest smile. "You said my name. That's enough. That's everything." Rose bent low, pressing her forehead to his, tears sliding freely now. "No, not enough. Not until we make it out of this. Not until we're free." She kissed him then, tasting salt and blood and smoke, but also something deeper, something unbroken. When she pulled away, his eyes were wet, and for once they weren't hardened by the outlaw's mask. They were just Ethan's eyes, filled with a love he had carried across years of silence. And so, beneath the dawn, with the prairie stretching endless around them, she whispered his name again, over and over, as if to weave it into the wind. And he whispered hers, the one no one else remembered, each syllable a lifeline, a binding thread stronger than chains or blood. Together, their names became a promise. No longer Rose, no longer outlaw, no longer saloon star or fugitive, just two souls stripped bare by the fire of life, holding fast to the truth that had survived everything. As the sun rose higher, gilding the endless fields, they stood again, her arm around him, his hand clutching hers, weak, wounded, but unbroken. And when they walked into the horizon, they left behind not only a town that had almost destroyed them, but also the ghosts of who they had been. What remained was only their truth. Two names remembered, two lives bound, and the fragile, burning hope of a future they would write together. A dress in the grass, a name on his lips, a dawn that promised no audience, no lies, only the raw, unvarnished story of two hearts who had found their way back. And with each step into the light, Rose felt it, her real name carried on the wind, no longer hidden, no longer lost. She was free. And Ethan, wounded but alive, smiled through the pain, knowing that in remembering her, he had found himself again.